Hello. Hi, YouTube. My name's Shakima. I just wanted to stop in for today's Tools for Using Tools Tuesday. Just to give you guys some key insights on some tips for inner child healing, how and why to go about doing it, why it's a necessity, and the relevance of being able to integrate the past life traumas, so the shadows of your experience, into the light that you are attempting to manifest, to make a more conducive, balanced, I guess, manifesting process, as opposed to something that's going to be conflicting to what you're trying to create, something that is potentially combative energies to what you are trying to manifest for yourself. So, just to sort of give you guys a brief. Hi, David. Nice to sort of have you in. I perfect timing actually. I was just about to get going on inner child and the relevance of doing the inner child work. So, basically, between the ages of 0 to 7, we are essentially sponges. We come in and we have no idea what to do in this realm. We don't really have any understanding of how it all works, and we are programmed as a result. The thing is, obviously, a lot of the programming happens in our subconscious mind, and once we become aware and conscious by the age of 7, basically, is when our conscience sort of kicks in, and that's when we have received all of our downloads. That's when we have become a little bit more attuned to what is going on in this realm, and that's when we sort of formulate our patterns in terms of what we're going to be playing out in our lives in our adult representations of ourselves. Now, with inner child healing, it's really a case of just sort of going through the process and acknowledging maybe some of the things that you were subjected to as a child and how it may subsequently impact your creating process as an adult. So, just to sort of give you an idea, sometimes I'll put it to you like this actually. You tend to find that women that are in relationships with men that are emotionally unavailable, they potentially would have been children that found themselves in situations where their father was emotionally unavailable. How these things kind of show up in our lives, essentially, especially for a female, your father is your first love. That's the first male figure that you kind of fall in love with. And you will essentially go through cycles of selecting your dad and the different reflections of your dad that you are, sounds weird, but that you are attracted to, because this is the first man that you've ever loved. And it's one of those things, equally for a man as well. You tend to find in most relationships, men go into a relationship not actually realizing, but they're looking for their mum. And it depends on the kind of relationships that they do have with their mothers. For you tend to find for relationships where some men are particularly close with their mum to the point where it's almost smothering. It's difficult for a female as a partner to then come in and integrate into his life as a partner, as opposed to being able to live up to the expectations of the kind of relationships that he has with his mum. So the relationship with our inner child is significantly important for our creating process. Essentially, depending on how much our inner child has been subjected to, it will formulate the patterns for how we actually create our relationships around us externally. Some of the things that happens for us is that it's all a case of monkey see, monkey do, basically. So, for the most part, there are certain things that we are intentionally taught. There are certain things, behavioral stuff. We go to school and we get some sort of programming between the ages, I don't know, between 3 to 7 as well. We get some programming there that kind of gives us a underlying pattern. And also we continue to be subjected to be reprogrammed as we, go into our adult lives as well. So for the most part, our inner child is, for me personally, whenever I tend to do inner child work, I go seeking my inner child through meditation. So I would say that the inner child lies dormant to some in the subconscious mind, creating on a subconscious level for us in the external realm. So for a lot of the situations where people find themselves sort of wondering why a pattern keeps showing up, essentially you have not necessarily alchemized that DNA within yourself. So somewhere in your mind there is still a pattern that exists, and because that pattern exists in your subconscious mind, because that child hasn't necessarily gone through the process of the emotional baggage that they're carrying with the trauma of certain situations that they face, it then impacts how you are able to create as an adult. So it's really, really important for a lot of us that we are firstly connected to our inner child and having regular conversations with our inner child to have more of an understanding of some of the things that the inner child is still trying to process. Because if you imagine, as a child, you don't necessarily know how to go through your emotional processing for a lot of circumstances that you would have found yourself in. If you think about it, again, just sort of going back on the daddy issue situation, I personally call it the daddy issue demon, because again, just to address that word in the room, for me, when I consider the words, it's a case of demons, is what I'm speaking about. It's a case of lower vibrational thoughts, lower reflections of ourselves. So every thought basically wants to be actualized and realized in the 3D physical realm. And sometimes we have lower vibrational thoughts that are triggered by our emotional, I guess, attachment to the situation, and it will then show up in our lives. So you tend to find, when I'm speaking about demons, because that word will probably be thrown around quite a bit throughout the process of this, I am speaking about the lower reflections of ourselves that we are here to evolve from. It's the, I guess, fixed ego's point of view of itself, as far as the perspective that the ego has, that it's here to evolve and expand its consciousness beyond. Okay. Think about it this way: babies cry for everything, simply because their egos aren't pleased about the circumstances. Their nappy's wet. They don't really know how to process that, so they're just going to cry about it. That's just how they feel for the moment. Babies are actually some of the best emotional processors. They are some of the best, what I like to call, emotional alchemists. They literally just kind of go through a process of releasing constantly, which is fantastic, because this is how we are able to actually allow for the ego to expand itself, by going through a process of release, so that the ego can get the opportunity to get a clearer perspective potentially. A lot of the times you'll find that there are situations that you find yourself in, for instance, when you find yourself in situations where you have anxiety. Now this is a circumstances that are showing up in your life simply because there's a pattern within your subconscious mind where your ego hasn't necessarily processed a emotion that it considers to be in alignment with anxiety. So what I generally recommend for people that do sort of, I'm not going to say suffer from anxiety, but that find that that pattern kind of shows up in their life, I would definitely recommend having a think. And I don't necessarily mean a think in your logical mind, I mean a think in your heart chakra space, because for the most part, your inner child kind of communicates here, but through here. So your inner child has a lot of feelings attached to the circumstances that it's experiencing. As an adult, we tend to go through the rational, logical processing of things. So we gain representatives basically as an adult for the inner child emotional traumas. So for people that aren't necessarily processing their contracts with, again, for me, the demon of anxiety, because it's a lower vibration, ultimately you wouldn't be anxious if you already understand that the circumstances that you are put in are here to allow you to evolve into who you truly are, essentially. But sometimes the ego drowns, basically. That's kind of what it feels like, especially when you think about anxiety. The heart rate speeds up, and the breathing a lot of the times will be fluctuated. It's really a case where the ego, because of the circumstances that it's being thrown into, is almost drowning under the emotion that it's experiencing in that time. So anxiety generally crops up when we feel like we are overwhelmed by the experience, when we feel like we are less than or incapable of the experience that we are being thrown into. And again, we're not being thrown into anything. It's really a situation that we are actually fulfilling our contracts. Our soul is fulfilling its contracts to itself to be able to expand its consciousness. And these are circumstances that will show up to give us an opportunity to show us exactly how amazing we are. Okay, so for anxiety, I would recommend going back to the first time that you ever experienced anxiety in your life. And even now, I'm thinking about potentially my first time, when I can see how my inner child kind of reacted to that situation. My breathing became, it was irregular all of a sudden, and it's almost like I wanted to cry, but also at the same time, I didn't feel comfortable enough in that situation, in the environment, to be able to release and purge the energy that was being, I guess, the energy that was kind of welling up inside, basically, because that's what's happening. There's a lot of energy kind of working its way through your chakra systems, actually processing what's going on, as you're having this self-realization of your external circumstances. You have to then go through your root chakra, your sacral chakra, your the solar plexus. You kind of have to go through all of the chakras to be able to get to where you can move beyond the anxiety in the space. And sometimes you'll find, for most cases when we're dealing with anxiety, you'll find that it kind of sits, it becomes, I'm not going to say wedged, but it becomes, it's difficult basically for it to actually make its way through the solar plexus and the heart chakra, because basically there is a, how can I put it? There is a particular passion or a particular intention that is attached as far as the outcome of the situation. And it is now the willpower that's being harnessed, because all of a sudden it's almost a case of saying that you are incapable. You are not good enough. You are not worthy to be able to fulfill exactly what your potential is able to do in the situation. For the most part, what I would say is that when these types of situations kind of crop up, what I do recommend are breathing exercises. Uh, definitely important, because the ego needs to be able to kind of remove itself from its current perspective and move into something that's going to be a little bit more open for it. Generally speaking, what's happening in that environment, in your mind space, the ego is like, okay, what is going on? I don't know how to adjust to this type of situation. So it's when fear sort of sets in, and fear is one of those vibrations. It's so dense. In fact, fear can actually drag you completely down, and away from your potential in circumstances. So in most cases, when you do find yourself in situations, try not to feed the fear, because that's what's happening. For the most part, you tend to find that most of the lower vibration thoughts come as a result of fear. So to me personally, fear is like the devil itself, the demon of the underworld, because so many different reflections of things can come from fear and come through fear. And it depends on how your mind has a tendency to conjure things up. What I personally did to combat my fear a while back was sit myself in a dark room for up to 3 days, hours at a time, just to sort of see how my mind sort of goes about conjuring things, especially when it's a case of being in complete darkness, fear of the unknown type thing. And I just kind of watched what kind of came through, so that it's almost like I allowed for myself to be able to be beyond the fear. It's almost like I faced all my fears in that moment as far as what my mind could conjure up, and beyond that experience, I was then able to, I guess I got comfortable with the space. So whenever I felt, yeah, no, I know. What I would say, I didn't actually sort of bring any tea in today, and I do actually want some tea because I can tell my throat chakra is actually wanting to be able to project. The dark room thing definitely does help, simply because for the most part, when we find ourselves in situations with fear, it's a fear of the unknown. The ego always wants to know what's happening because it is under the illusion that it's in control. And if it can get the I guess the self-realization that ultimately all of the things that it is conjuring up is simply an illusion, and spirit is actually what is in ultimate control of the vessel, then it kind of breaks the ego down a little bit, gives it the opportunity to be able to, how can I put it? Continue to evolve. It's almost like it's ever expanding. And what kind of happened for me in that situation is that when I kind of feel the dark energies, I don't necessarily entertain it. It's really more or less a case of me letting it know that you're not welcome. Whatever the intention is, I protect myself with a ball of light, and it's really a case of also understanding that these things come to us from a reflection of ourselves that is still subconsciously calling it to us. So there's a part of ourselves, our inner child, that is still wary about things that hasn't necessarily been processed emotionally. Um, what I would say as well, personally speaking, in terms of people around us as well, because what we'll tend to find is that the inner child that is basically dealing or not dealing with abandonment issues will draw circumstances to it, to you, the adult representative of this child, that lies within you, um, for you to be continuously abandoned, continuously sort of like withdrawn from situations and isolated. So if you find yourself in situations, what I would personally recommend, if you find yourself in situations where you have people around you that are potentially, because again, we have to understand that as we consciously navigate through the process of attempting to heal our inner child, not everybody is on that path for themselves. And what you tend to find with those situations is that you will then subsequently be affected by the demons of others, by the things that other people aren't necessarily processing themselves, by the things that, I'm going to say this much as well. If you're ever in a room and someone says, there's parts of themselves that they'd rather not know about, get the hell up and leave. Do not look back. Hold no regrets. Hold no guilt. Just know that that is the best sort of thing for you to do for yourself, because what will happen in situations like those is that the parts of themselves that they are choosing to be blissfully ignorant to, you will be able to experience those parts or those reflections of themselves. And in today's society as well, simply because we're so focused on the positives of things, we don't necessarily take enough time to do the shadow working. We don't take enough time to basically acknowledge the fact that our body remembers our traumas. Our body remembers the emotional, it kind of leaves an emotional signature when we go through situations. So it's a case of alchemizing that DNA within ourselves. Things that can sort of help as far as the tools, because that is the intention. Meditation is absolutely the biggest tool that I'd recommend for this, because I consider it me dictation. When I go into meditation, and a lot of the times when I'm doing me dictation, you tend to find that a lot of people, when they go into meditation, they find themselves being in places where there's a lot of fog, and that's because you're literally having to go within to find yourself. You are actually having to go within to find your inner child amidst all of the expectations of your parents, friends, family, societal expectations that you've subsequently placed on yourself because of all of these different factors that have shown up in your life. And you actually have to then peel all of that shadow back so that you can actually see the child, the light that is beneath that. And a lot of the times it's quite difficult for a lot of people to be able to navigate to a point where, they're able to see their inner child and then talk their inner child through some of the things that they experience, some of the traumas that they experience. Like, for instance, a child dealing with fatherlessness, because again, I have to sort of go to the general sort of issue. This is like a big pandemic, I guess, in society. So for children that sort of go through those circumstances, for a man, it's difficult because they are then subjected to really questioning whether or not they have the capability to be able to father themselves, as far as like fathering a child. And also, that has to come by them learning how to father themselves first and foremost, because where that role model isn't present and they don't have a direct example to sort of get a blueprint from, they are now building the blueprint for what they require to be able to functionally perform that role and step into that character, that version of themselves, because that's what happens. We play roles. It's kind of like us as trees, playing different, I guess, characters. It's like the branches. We play different characters depending on the different circumstances that we are faced with dealing with, or that we are called upon to allow us to evolve in situations. And for children that tend to, I'd say females that tend to find themselves in situations where they're dealing with fatherlessness, that tends to show up in relationships that are quite toxic in a lot of different ways. And equally as well, I'd say for the guys, I think for the most part, it's a case of self-worth is a lesson that is really being taught in the situations for them, because now that they are in a situation where they don't have a blueprint, right? And they are trying to create something that they've never seen or experienced themselves personally. And all of a sudden, they will have very high expectations, basically. In some cases, quite unrealistic expectations as well, simply because it means so much to them because of the lack. So it's a case of addressing one's intention as well with those types of situations, because if we're looking at it from what we didn't have, we will then continue to create more of a lack perspective. So we will continue to find ourselves in a situation where we're at a loss. We're having things that we're having to grieve. We're having regrets, basically. We're sort of holding guilt. So I think one of the main things to do in those types of situations, what I generally sort of would advise with those types of circumstances, is to go within through meditation and seek out that inner child. And once you're able to find them, and again, once the shadows, I'd say the shadows that kind of come over, again, those are demons. Again, other people's projections over your space. Those are, again, effectively what I would consider to be demons, because it's not your true essence of yourself. It is somebody else's version of you that they have created in your space. And that now exists in your space of creating. So it's a case of returning to sender. Yeah. It's a case of returning that back to them, because that is not rightfully who you are, and really acknowledging who you are in that moment. And then you will actually be able to find that inner child. And I'll say this, the eyes really are the window to the soul. So when you sort of are able to go in and do that kind of work, you'll be able to see the difference through your eyes. Because what happens, I find whenever I do inner child work, I find that my eyes are actually brighter. Um, it kind of fades again over time, because I readjust, my vibration has elevated and my light has been activated, so my chakra, because in most cases you'll find for situations and circumstances like those, it is directly attached to the root chakra, or an imbalance in the root chakra. So when you are dealing with situations like those, and I'm going to be doing a tools for using tools on balancing out the chakras in different circumstances, that can be, factors to give us an opportunity to balance out the chakras. So definitely sort of stay tuned for that as well. I'm probably going to be expanding on this during my podcast, sort of next week. So we'll just sort of need to roll with the punches for the time being. But when we are dealing with situations where we're having to remove the projections of others, firstly, before we can see our true, authentic self, once we do see that individual, what we have to do, because a lot of the times what happens is that we take on other people's projections because of guilt. You know, we feel guilty for speaking our truth. We feel guilty for having our experience. We feel guilty if our experience of them is not what they tell themselves that they are. You know, sometimes it's almost like your experience of someone is completely different to what they are projecting into the world or trying to sort of okay, so a lot of the times people sort of put on representatives. That's why I call it representatives, because when we are not processing the emotion, we get a representative that we can give to the external world. It's like when we shut ourselves down, basically, and we're not dealing with our emotional processing, we're not dealing with our emotional baggage, and someone asks us, for instance, how are you doing? And you say, I'm okay. That's not your truth. You know, you're dealing with a lot. And really, as well, in those situations, you tend to find when you're not able to be completely honest with a person in a situation like that, it's because the vibration of the ask was never sincere in the first place. You know, it was basically more or less just asking for the sake of asking, so you don't actually get the opportunity to relieve yourself. You don't actually get the opportunity to release in that moment or purge, simply because it was a disingenuous, basically, sort of request. You know, they weren't asking like to genuinely understand or understand maybe what you are going through. They were just asking simply because it's a conversation starter. It's more of a surface thing. So be mindful of stuff like that as well. And also, sometimes I will say this much, that's not every time, but sometimes some of us are very heavily guarded because of circumstances that may have us feeling as though we have issues with vulnerability. You know, when the inner child takes a lot of hits, you know, when there's a lot of trauma that hasn't been processed, we definitely get extremely guarded, and that inner child all of a sudden kind of becomes a barrier for you. You know, when we talk about blocking our blessings, that's what's happening. The inner child has a program that needs to be it kind of needs to be ejected and then it's a case of reprogramming that default, because that's what happens, what's in the subconscious mind, because it is happening at a subtle conscious level. It becomes our default program, and we have to be really mindful of how we are creating our circumstances. It's like people that come from broken homes. In most cases, we'll find ourselves attempting to you know break the pattern, if you will, end the cycle. But in most cases, we will find what we need to do firstly is analyze what the circumstances around our broken home is firstly, before we can actually be able to create something different, something completely, I guess, polar opposite to that experience. And a lot of the times as well, what I will say, when we're talking about broken home situations, for instance, a lot of the times the children that are affected by these situations tend to have a lot of guilt. They have a lot of blame for the circumstances. Is again because children do not understand, why they are subjected to these things. And I don't think that adults take enough time to have conversations, adult conversations. You'd actually be surprised how adult children are. They're actually more adult than a lot of the adults that are like roaming around out here, because there's so many demons, like adult representatives out here, whereas children are honest, they are truthful. And if you're able to have an open conversation with them, it would actually give them the opportunity to process their emotional trauma. So for instance, if you're dealing with, yeah, I think if you're dealing with children where they ask questions genuinely because they want to know, they are being programmed here, and you are going to be the, how can I put it, you are going to be the teacher for what they sort of take on board. You are going to be the teacher of their program. You are going to be the teacher of their editor, essentially. And when you are having those types of interactions, it's a case of making sure that you have honest conversations with them and letting them know. When I say honest as well, clearly there are some information that is adult content, but it's a case of breaking it down to some level of understanding so that the child, again, isn't subjected to any deception, because that's what happens a lot of the times. As children, we are deceived by our elders, by the adults around us, because they feel like they're protecting us, and they have all right to. But in most cases, what happens when they feel as though they are protecting us from the life that we chose to come here to create, because our spirit already knows the ultimate truth. I'm going to say that much. What happens in those situations for us is that all of a sudden we find ourselves in situations where we continue to be lied to in our adult lives. We find ourselves in situations where deceit is a main factor for us, because they have now formulated contracts with us of, well, they've formulated contracts and drawn us into their contracts with the demon of deceit, which is their ego wanting to create for you what isn't necessarily rightfully yours. But at the same time, it's a situation where you are getting the opportunity to be able to, how can I put it? You're getting the opportunity to be able to sort of see how this pattern has been formulated into your subconscious mind. Everything is happening at a subtle level of our consciousness, is what I'd say. And we just kind of have to be careful about what we have mentally created, because a lot of the times we fall victim to our circumstances, but really we are creating every single moment of every aspect of our reality. Yes, there are factors where other people impact our ability to create, and again, that is to teach us something about the contracts that we have. Are other people's feelings more important than ours? Do we hold guilt for being able to live in our authenticity? These are some of the things that we really need to address, and why it's important to process your inner child traumas is because DNA exists, and like I said, your DNA never forgets the emotional signature of the traumas. It's like when you have found yourself being lied to, your intuition knows the truth. That's why even as an adult, when you find yourself in situations where you are faced with dealing with deception, your mind and your body is telling you otherwise, because even as a child, you knew the truth. But the ego that wanted to draw you into its contracts of deception created that for you. And if you aren't necessarily if you do not value yourself enough, basically, because I'm going to say this, the demon of deception is one of the biggest demons that really affects us as far as creating ailments within the DNA structure of the vessel. The more lies that are told to us or that we are told, it actually holds a signature within our vessel, and over time it manifests. It manifests itself in different ailments. A lot of the times it will affect our nervous system, because our nerves knows the truth. So when we're talking about the demon of deception, it will show up in ailments in our nervous system. So we really have to be careful how we are interacting with people, and it's really a case of us making sure that we're speaking our personal truths at all times, unapologetically so, but also tactfully so. It's never really a case to make anybody else feel bad about their experience or put anybody else down. It's just really giving that person the opportunity as well to be able to maybe live in some authenticity themselves, because a lot of the times people just really want to live in their representatives. They don't necessarily want to live in the true vibration of themselves, because, for lack of a better way of putting it, some of us don't want to accept that we might have darker reflections of ourselves. And I'm going to say this, demons don't make us bad people. Demons keep us honest. And they are here because again, these are lower vibrations of ourselves. These are our primitive natures, if you will. They are here to basically let us know that we are imperfect human beings. They're what we came here to evolve beyond. And it's all a case of the process. It's all a part of the process. And good people do bad things every day. If we can actually take those words and break the construct of them down to positive and negative vibrations, then we have more of a premise to actually be able to keep things 100% true, completely honest with each other, no agendas behind any kind of wording, interaction, circumstances. And it really actually gives us the opportunity to be able to just keep our light going. Like, honestly, it just keeps our light going. Thank you, David, because I feel like a lot of the times people don't want to accept these parts of ourselves, but it exists, and us kind of turning a blind eye to it doesn't mean that it's not there. It simply means that we are unaware that it is still creating in our external world, and this is why we will have the patterns continue to show up for us to let us know that there's still work that needs to be done. So whenever I find myself in a situation where I'm like, oh God, I thought I like address this demon, I kind of take a minute to sort of go back in. I go back in to do some shadow work and understand, because this is another part of it as well. As we alchemize the surface level of certain primitive natures of ourselves, we are able to sort of basically, when we deal with it at surface level, we see. Awesome. I think when we deal with it at surface level, we kind of see who it is that we've kind of formulated that contract with, that interaction, basically, that behavioral pattern. But when we go deeper beyond the surface, we then get to see the choice that we made to take it on board. Because a lot of the times, what happens is that we actually have to be open. We have to be open to allow these energy exchanges to happen. And without our say so, we can't actually be subjected to anybody else's darkness. So when we want to blame people for how they show up in our lives, that's not necessarily the truth. We kind of have to look closer to home and actually acknowledge that we allowed for the circumstances to happen to give us an opportunity to learn something about ourselves. And they simply just showed up to fulfill their soul contracts to us, to let us know that, hey, that thing that you were supposed to be doing, you're not doing that yet, but you're pretty close. And if you can address this particular situation, you'll be surprised to see where you could potentially take it. And you'll be surprised to see how much you're able to grow, how much you're able to evolve because of actually taking the time to go through this circumstance with me, you know? I think inner child healing is important because it means that we don't then have to subject our own children to the patterns that we have been subjected to, so we can break the chain, we can break the cycle. And also, it gives our inner child the opportunity to be healed. It gives us the opportunity to alchemize a lot of, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be traumas. I keep saying trauma, but that's how it feels for the inner child. It feels traumatic. It feels like a traumatic experience emotionally. And that's why it will show up in our adult lives as a lesson for us to learn, because that child still wants to be acknowledged. And for a lot of us that deal with abandonment, we tend to learn how to abandon our inner child even as our adult representative. And that's where we'll find ourselves putting people's feelings before our own. That's where sort of circumstances like those will crop up in our day-to-day lives. What I will say, when we are at the place where we're open to living in or our authenticity, it really gives us an opportunity to be able to show the world who we are, live in purpose, and also allow for our chakras to be, completely in alignment, because the chakras are always churning. It's always trying to process information. It's always trying to process information. And then circumstances show up. And when those circumstances show up, it's like, if we don't process that emotional baggage, because that's what the chakra processes, it processes the emotional body. And if we're not able to do that, it's almost like that churning of the wheel goes, there's like, there becomes glitches in the process. And that's where we will find dark shadows over our chakras. And that's why when we go into our meditation and we see the shadows, it's because we need to acknowledge what chakra is that shadow being casted over. Is that being casted over my solar plexus, which is meaning that I'm not able to manifest as I desire to with this situation, simply because this was a factor for me? Is this something that is a darkness or shadow casted over my root chakra because it's affecting my foundational reflection of myself? Is this something that happened within my home? Basically, that's where you'll find issues with your root chakra. Also, in most cases with your sacral chakra as well, but that kind of happens externally as well, where you can find that it happens in schools. You can find that it happens just by general interaction with people, actually. So it's really, I am going to be like really breaking this down because I wanted to be able to come in and give just a little bit of information. I didn't even anticipate like taking the video to this length of time because this was just so supposed to be short and sweet. But I guess there was just more information to really just, kind of purge and put out there. But I will be formulating something that's a little bit more structured, to give some real tools basically to assist you in going through the process of the inner child work. Like, stuff that I do is make sure that I always have crystals with me. I always have stones with me. um, they kind of attune themselves, or I attune myself to them, and it really kind of helps me to stay grounded. For one, it keeps me protected. And I utilize different stones for different things. I also utilize Thank you, David. I was trying to keep it short, but I talk a lot, I guess. um, but there are things that you can utilize, and prayer is actually the very best tool that I would recommend always. Prayer and meditation. I'd also recommend different herbs. So I'm going to formulate, create some structure for you guys to be able to formulate. Rosemary, peppermint, and chamomile are my go-tos. I generally utilize those for my day-to-day sort of interaction. Peppermint's actually awesome, as well as chamomile's awesome for solar plexus activation, and also the throat chakra activation as far as the chamomile. Lavender is also an amazing herb to utilize as well. And it's a great essential oil to utilize. It's actually very good for children when they're dealing with emotional distress. Literally, just grab some lavender. I've actually got some lavender oil right here, actually. Grab some lavender oil, pop it on the palm of their hand, and just start, pushing through the meridian lines in the palms, and get them talking, because sometimes they get lost in their emotions, kids. That's why they cry so much. And also, what I would say is purging is the best release. Purging is the best release. If you find that there's some things from your childhood that are still affecting you, cry about it, dude. Like, honestly, cry about it and just let that vessel, release the energy. Let the vessel alchemize that dark DNA by releasing it from the vessel, and then you now get the opportunity to formulate a new perspective. Because what happens is that, for the most part, that child in our subconscious mind is telling itself a story. And now, as an adult representative, we can go in with a logical mind, because the child is the emotional body. Okay. The logical mind as an adult now has the opportunity to go in and rationalize the situation. So that's why, going into me dictation and having a conversation with that inner child, to say, it wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve it. You are completely protected. I have your best interest at heart. Don't worry about anybody else. They have their own struggles that they're dealing with. They have their own tests that they're sort of going through. And we appreciate them for being able to give us the opportunity to be so closely united because of the circumstances that they've subjected us to. And it was never personal, it was only for the purpose of our personal evolution as one, to be integrated into the one true form and self. Because what happens a lot of the times is that we become fragmented, because we want to be accepted by people. That's why we try to live up to people's expectations. And as we are fragmenting parts of ourselves for the sake of being accepted by people, the best thing that I can recommend for that is to first accept ourselves. First, accept yourself in your entirety so that you then don't need to continue to people please. And you come to the realization that the most important person to please is self. And that is the individual that is going to always have your best interest at heart, because the people that you are looking to please only have their best interest at heart. And there's nothing wrong with that. No shame or blame in it. To be fair, selfish people actually live a lot longer. They get so much further in life simply because they are ruthless. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be that way. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's a reflection that you now need to become to be able to navigate through the process, but just be aware, you know? And navigate tactfully through it for yourself, because how you navigate through it as well also says a lot about you. And how they receive you during the process of it equally says a lot about them in the process of you being able to, how can I put it, own all of who you are, because that's what's happening in the process. We're all here to own all of who we are, and the only way to do that is to evolve into our true state of ourselves. um, so yeah, I think when we're dealing with the inner child, we just have to come to the realization that it's here creating with us, and we have to nurture ourselves sometimes, because our parents will fall short. They can only give us what they have, and that is perfectly fine, because that's the reason we chose them. That's the reason we decided to come in this particular form of a vessel. That's the reason we chose that lineage, because we needed to go through working through a particular soul pattern, and these were the circumstances that were going to allow us to do so. So rather than victimizing ourselves to the circumstances of, okay, where our parents may fall short, just own it. I actually chose them, and I love them unconditionally on another realm of existence, because together, they chose you as much as you chose them. It was a like for like, a law of attraction situation. You were a certain vibrational form, they were a certain vibrational form, and it just kind of clicked. Um, but for the most part, if we can learn to stop victimizing ourselves to the circumstances, it would make it a lot easier for us to be able to accept every aspect of our circumstances. And also, if we can be very selective of the words that we use. Good and bad, to me personally, doesn't really exist. There's positive and negatives. And sometimes we get positive charges in our life because sometimes it's karmic values to it. Also, we could have potentially done a lot of work. Our aura, our chakras are in alignment. There's loads of factors to it. And it's not to say that when negativity shows up in your life, your chakras are off balance and all of these things as well. It's not necessarily to say that either. It's just to say that this is showing up to let you know that you are not yet where you desire to be. But by moving through this circumstance, you may just be able to get there a little bit faster. Shadow working is actually like one of the things that will really assist the evolution process. It kind of speeds the whole process up. When we're ignorant to the things that we're here to, I guess, alchemize, the things that we're here to evolve through, it just kind of causes delays. And really, we know why we're here, being this spirit in the vessel here, trying to navigate this avatar, because it's difficult, guys. Like I say all the time, I can't wait to sort of get back to my next tree life. um, but even that, those things are difficult too. It's just being able to be in this form comes with its own challenges. And in order to be able to navigate through those challenges, we have to understand that there is there are parts of us that are still trapped in parts of time. So when we're stuck in the past about the stories that we're telling ourselves about our childhood, it's a case of us now being the rational adults that we are to go back and say to that child, hey, it's not as bad as it seemed. It actually made you a better person. Don't worry about it. You're actually so awesome because of it, you know? So it's just everything is just happening synchronistically for us to be able to live up to our potential, guys. That's what I'd say. And it's an amazing time to be alive. We're moving into that 5D, going into that higher dimensional sort of state of being, those higher realms of thinking. And in order for us to really get there collectively, we also have to assist each other. And that's why when we find ourselves in the negative circumstances that we deal with, that's someone fulfilling their soul contract to us. So the best thing that I can advise as well when you go to have your conversation with your inner child is to thank anybody that has subjected you to any traumas. Thank them, because they made you a better person. They taught you how not to be by being themselves. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Some people learn differently. And for the people that, were there in support as you were able to sort of go through the traumatic experiences, because that's what it feels like for a child, again, have to repeat it, thank them too. Gratitude is one of those vibrations that surpasses fear. And when we are grateful, we find that the universe brings us more to be grateful for. Okay. I think I will leave it there because I had no intention of speaking for nearly an hour, but clearly I can talk forever. So I'm just gonna leave it there, but I hope that that was useful for somebody. And thank you, David, for actually sort of like stopping in. Great content and subject. Thank you. No, thank you, David. Honestly, I feel like going through no. Well, do you know what? I could talk forever too. But I really just wanted to be able to like make sure that I'm not, going off topic or not sort of like going off on a tangent. But you stuck with me. So I'm glad that I was able to sort of like keep the momentum of it going. But honestly, like I want to be able to utilize the tools that I have to assist others in being able to break free. The truth sets us free, guys. Like, just go out there and speak your truth. Always, always, always. Like, it's one of those things where by being more truthful, you'll actually find that the universe brings more truthful experiences to you, and you're actually able to experience more of your authentic self. And it will actually give you the opportunity to experience vibrations that are of circumstances that are of that vibration, basically. Because when we are living in deceit of who we really are out of fear, that we may not be accepted, it means that we bring more circumstances for us to shy away and hide and just kind of swallow ourselves into a little hole. We don't want that. 2019 is just, for me, like, this is kind of like how I even break it down. Like, we're going into 2020, and to me, next year is where spirit is really just like, okay, this is just going to be a completely new world. That's how I see it. That's how I envisaged it. That's how it keeps resonating with my spirit. So for 2019, I am doing my prep work for 2020. If you think about what 2020 means, it's all about clear vision, that clear perception, and it's really all about having that clear focus. So clear the fogs, guys. Clear the fogs. Like, clear away any fog on your third eye, any fog on your heart chakra, any fog on your solar plexus, your sacral, your root chakra. Clear it all away. And that's only going to happen by keeping true to what's going on in your crown chakra, your self-realizations. As your guides are speaking to you, as your spirit is letting you know the truth of its essence, clear all of that fog away. And let's go into 2020 nice and bright, everybody, because when our chakras have some fog, it's no fun. It's just, it becomes too difficult to be able to actually be who we really are, and we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to continue to be a version of ourselves. We want to be our authentic selves. Okay. I hope that was useful for you guys. I'm definitely gonna go now because I can see myself just going back into a tangent. But I love you guys. Thank you again, David, for tuning in. You are so awesome. And just keep being awesome, guys. I would say bye. Like, subscribe, share the video if there's anybody that you think could actually benefit from the information. And I will see you next Tuesday for Tools for Using Tools Tuesday. Also, actually, if you are interested in working with me, because I do spiritual life coaching, I do one-to-one work as well as far as inner child healing, hit me up. My email address is shakima8@gmail.com, or you can check out my website. I'll probably put some details in the description box about that. Thank you guys. Have a fantastic evening and keep being awesome. Mwah.